Today's story is titled, If You See a Dark Horse in the Desert, Run Back to Where the People Are, by The Republic. The link to the story is in the description below. Please enjoy.
I still have nightmares, terrors that plague me even now as I live a simple life. Last night was different. It wasn't the fields of battle I had known. It was plain. A bright blue sky and a flat white desert. Even in my sleep, my eyes strained to make sense of the scenery. Dancing heat waves blurred when the two colors met. The simplicity of this nightmare was interrupted by the arrival of a distant figure. The warp in shape solidified and gained form. A horse's silhouette against the blue background. In its mouth, a rattlesnake dangled lifelessly. I woke up back in my own bed, my hands and face covered in sweat. My morning now over, I got dressed and made my way to the bank. I wouldn't allow myself to lose a job over a vivid dream I had about animals. I began work by filling out ledgers. It hadn't even been minutes into my shift when I was summoned by some well-dressed gentleman. A dear friend had sent them to collect me. It struck me as odd, but the reason behind this informal invitation became clear when we arrived at his estate. Sadly, he had become bedridden from the gangrene that built in his legs, a sickly pus blanketing where his joints should have been. Before the affliction took hold of his mobility, my good friend was making plans to travel out west and meet with an acquaintance. It's difficult to recount our first meeting, since he had come down with the leg rot. He was a very haunting figure, just laying in his bed, all while being tended to by the best physicians money could buy. Our conversation was eerily brief. I felt that he wanted to disregard his condition and only focus on the updating of our current lives.
My friend, you needn't worry. I am pampered enough by kith and kin alike. I do not need my good friend of 10 years to slow down for me.
Barely shifting his weight to stare me in the eyes, I took my seat beside him, taking care to not steal his sunlight as I spoke.
This is in no way a proper form of making a reunion. I'd hope you were just taking a holiday. The good Lord knows you needed one after our abysmal last quarter. Nonsense, for I like where the work is. Keeps me busy, as one should be. I must admit, though, you are the hardest working person I know. Farmhand, courier, and now the most diligent banker this side of the Mississippi.
His vitality had put on a facade as his eyes gleamed with reminiscence. I nodded my head in agreement. It had been too long. I didn't like to see my friend suffer as he did. An aristocrat by chance, he was a kind soul at heart, always taking pay cuts to ensure the bank thrived. His accumulated wealth was one earned by continuous strategic investments such as bonds, shares, and trusts. He was also bold in cashing in on old favors, a soldier that saved many a wealthy. I adjusted my seat to look at him straight on.
So much for catching up on lost time. I do wonder why you fetched me. It's not something small assuming the place of the meeting. The rot's devouring me. I can't make the travel out west. I had an obligation to make amends with an old acquaintance, but as you can see, I'd soon expire than meet them face to face.
Whatever sprite he had scraped together died when I brought up the subject. I was caught off guard. It was unusual that he had friends in such rural places. I asked him as much pertaining to the request.
A brother in arms? Something more important than that. Besides, all my wartime friends are dead. No. I need you to deliver this letter to Santa Fe. All that I need to say is written. I don't believe I'll get another chance to.
His hand went limp as he passed over his possession. I was surprised at the request. It's a daunting task to ask someone to make the pilgrimage west. Danger lurked in every pocket of the last untamed frontier. Before I could poke further, he made a last-minute request.
Make the trip a quick one. Ride with haste. I would hate for you to succumb to the blistering heat from our idle chit-chat.
Even if I didn't want to know the truth, my belief was that he'd recover. I chuffed. It was the last time I'd ever see him laugh. He offered me a vast per diem to account for the logistics and issues I might face along the way. I scoffed at the sum, making sure he knew about my thoughts.
This is more than you pay me in a year. It won't be the last, I promise you. There will be more after you return. Compensation for the lengthy trip.
His lungs weakly exclaimed as he settled back into his imprint. I hugged my friend goodbye. The weakness in his arms made evident as he struggled to lift one arm in acknowledgement. As I write this section, I still remember him staring at me as I departed. Perhaps this is sentiment speaking, but it felt as though he was gifting me the last shreds of his will, sending me off with his strength and determination. He may have been a hard-working man, but there's no mistake that he was an outstanding person. When I entered the manor, I was eager to meet a familiar face. However, my departure was melancholic, to say the least. I was taken home and told to catch as much rest as I could, for there were very few places of comfort along the trail. I couldn't say no to him. He afforded me a well-paying position in his bank, as well as aiding me with my housing expenses. In the morning, men from the manor delivered some essentials, all packed away in satchels, and handed me the reins to a staunch, hardy beast. Gray fur with lighter spots in all of his legs, below the first knuckle, were white. It's bad luck to name your animals, as they can succumb to terrible ailments and die on a whim. I disregarded this mental notion and named the gray horse Socks. I grabbed my Winchester and left my humble abode. Making my way for the west, all of southern Missouri bidding me farewell with waving branches, the wafting scent of cornflowers trailing close behind. A sense of despair set in as I asked myself the question aloud.
If he's dead, then would I be expected to break the news to this stranger?
I didn't want to believe it, but there was a high chance that my friend I had known for over a decade would not be home when I returned. I calmed my nerves and headed out onto the road with many inns. The trip took nearly 10 days of slow-paced trotting before we saw the borders to Indian Territory. It was quite a ways further, but I was determined to escape the wooded forest land. I persuaded Socks to make haste with a slight kick of the heel. The transition from mountains, forests, plains, and marshes was so gradual that you could light a candle and watch it evaporate before you left the first terrain. This night in particular had seemed to approach fast. The setting sun cast a myriad of figures against the path, their shadows playing tricks on my mind and building up anticipation that something was going to jump out at me. A coarse hiss broke the tension so fierce that Socks knocked me to the ground. I cursed.
Damn copperhead!
The slithering critter warned as it curled into the shape of a cow pie. I took out my knife, and the snake struck at me. The sudden movement gave me the perfect opportunity to chop its head off. The mouth was now struck open with a surprised expression. I would need to avoid any occurrences like that if I wanted to make the trip all in one piece. That night, I had some choice words with Socks about preceding behavior. I went to sleep late after we checked in. My morning had gotten off to a rough start because I slept in. I struggled to wake myself up and get dressed in anticipation for the long journey ahead. I saddled up Socks, drank murky water, and gnawed on hardened bread. I was in an absent state of mind, riding but not taking notice of my surroundings. It was like a daze that wanted during sickness, gliding through time like a river washing over a wedged stone. I have a difficult time when out on long trips. My mind wanders and I end up deep in thought. It affected me greatly. I hate the quiet. It invites all the bad memories. This was only exaggerated when crossing through Cherokee land. I don't know if it was guilt, pity, or empathy, but passing by the pitched tents and rows of fires filled me with a great deal of sadness. Thousands of far-removed despot squatters near open flame to protect against the cold wind. In prior years, a younger me would have whooped and hollered at their despair. A kid only knowing the truth their parents tell them. Mine were no different. However, it was my time with the Greys that opened my eyes to the bigger picture. We won many wars, and these poor few were only defending themselves the best way they could. My first real conversation with an Indian was at the siege of Petersburg. My 18-year-old self had just joined the Greys, invigorated by my sense of duty. William Sherman had just carved through the South something bloody. I was very intolerant then, as shown by my blatant disregard for my fellow countrymen, Irish volunteers, free black men, and the tribe of savages stood shoulder to shoulder in those filthy trenches. It's strange how much a siege can wear one down, so much so that I would end up being shifted around the defense perimeter with bands of Indians. That's when I met my friend of the Cherokee. It's funny, I can't exactly recall his name, only his last name. Surprisingly, it was Bratton. As you can imagine, his maiden name was one of indigenous fanfare, flowery even for his lot. We started out butting heads and shoving each other into the cold mud, but we both found ourselves sharing a flask. Bottles full of life found themselves thoroughly emptied as we passed our turns around. The flask is where we really connected, where Bratton and I really became friends. "You're not like the other Strickens, are you?" I wiped away runoff. "I was like them up until I was thrown in with the Eastern Division. You're not so bad yourself, Bright." "I know. Still got the bruises to show." I laughed, choking on burning spit. I gave out a light-hearted cuss. "Damn it, choked on my laugh. Wasn't even that funny." We both laughed for an hour, letting the potation work its magic, taking off the sleeve of worry, woe, and worse. It was then Bratton turned to me and asked, "Where will you go after this war has fought its length?" I struggled to string together a sincere and serious response. "What do you mean?" "I've been informed about my family's land being seized by both the Union and Confederate government. I'm expecting to meet them on a new reservation. I don't think I'll get the chance at life I was hoping for. Let me ask you again, where will you go after the war has been fought?" I had only seen two emotions from this clay statue up until this point: boiling rage and piss-drunk happiness. This was different. He had completely switched complexion and stared at me with sad eyes. I conceded. "I'll probably go to where the industry is. Cotton's for the rich, tobacco for the privy, and indigo for the experts. I can't hardly get one to harvest, let alone budding. I'm more equipped to work with machinery." "Where you're going, I can't hope to follow. I wish things would change for the better. I am more than sum of my parts. I wanted to present that to the world with my writing." The tone shifted for the somber. I wasn't sitting with some hollowed-out caricature. Whooping, bow-slinging, scalping, and smoking were absent from the figure I was made to hate with the burning passion of 1,000 furnaces. Sitting beside me was someone just like me. Bratton had ambition, passion, and ideas. He wanted to pursue what made him happy, what brought him absolute genuine joy. I'm no bookworm, but his work was plenty enthralling. I turned to him, placing my hand on his shoulder, and said, "You're gonna be just fine. Whoever wins this brawl will listen to you. This war is fought by many braves. You are headed for good fortune." I gave my friend a comforting lie. He was smart enough to probably see through it at the moment. Broughton didn't protest, smiling in acknowledgement. He asked me a grim question. "Will you take my book and publish it, just in case I don't make it through the smoke?" I think he knew he wasn't long for this world, but the notion still pierced deep and embedded a powerful sense of melancholic sentiment. I obliged his request, and he was off for bed. I wish morning never came because of the crater. Broughton was sent to where the action was. I don't think he had enough time to register the powder keg going off. Hell, I sure didn't. I have to keep convincing myself that his death was quick, but there were still Greys alive after the explosion. Torn and mangled, but alive. I was busy holding down my section of the siege to fully process Broughton's departure. It's strange. I don't remember it raining that day, yet there was a pool of liquid at the bottom of the crater. It wasn't until after the battle that I was informed on its true origin. It was neither water nor grease. I'll let you decide what it was for yourself. I'm ashamed. Ashamed I couldn't fulfill his final wishes. That book still lies beneath the drawer of my desk, collecting dust long after its author had died, a reminder of my failure. When I broke from my trance, Socks was taking a brisk walk through the grass under a thick canopy. I was slow in correcting his direction. The slight jostle was a welcome remedy to my aching head. Once I patted him to remind of my existence, we located the beaten path and took off for the New Mexico territory. Now, I was closer than ever to Santa Fe. I located a travel stop on my route, a trading post on the border. I wasn't able to leave the place in time to steal the remaining daylight. I was going to have to stay the night. It was just my luck when I noticed they had a mule for sale. That would lessen the load that I had to dump on Socks. Once I resupplied, I had asked the owners for a spare bedroom. They didn't have any, but they cleaned the back office and charged me for the night. I was well stocked with food, a new watering canteen, a beast of burden and medicine for any injuries I might sustain on the trip back. I hadn't noticed this earlier in the day, but there wasn't a cloud in sight. The breeze was gradually picking up. Sand was kicking into the air just a little, and the distant blue of the mountains grew grayer and grayer over time. I went to sleep without heeding the region's stern warnings. The calm of the morning betrayed the later hours of the day. The baby blue sky was painted with orange, pinks, and reds. It looked like heaven's light was being sampled off to the eyes of all who beheld it. I got Socks and the mule fueled up, not wanting to waste daylight. I skipped my breakfast under the false pretense that I'd get a chance to sate my appetite in Santa Fe. We were off with good weather at our side. Oh, how foolish I was. The scorching sun came after us not long after we left the last inkling of civilization. That's when our trouble started. The wind stopped being a gentle breeze and fiercely grew into an onslaught of strong blasts. The grains of sand, formerly too heavy to be kicked into the air, now became sharp pins and needles that pelted me raw. The sky was blotted out by a growing haze of dust in the air. My once clear path became a fog of all the warnings I had been so careless in not heeding. That's when I saw it. A wall of tan clouds, growing ever vast and closing the distance rapidly, heading straight for me. Miles in each direction, the sandstorm enveloped the horizon and threatened my plans, so I acted with a quick reprisal. I made a detour to hopefully avoid the storm, but that did nothing to lighten the impact. I had to venture south as the storm was hot on my tail. It caught me rather quickly and sent us off the route by a considerably large margin. I was senseless, literally, as I tried to navigate the grainy field of view with nothing more than a flat cap and cowl. My eyes were bombarded with all manner of irritants. My lungs filled with sand and plunged me into a coughing fit. My skin burned from the tiny impacts the grains of sand left.
I wasn't even afforded the luxury of a beaten path because the torrent of violent wind eroded the established path. For lack of a better term, I was well and truly lost, thrown off by the trail and at the mercy of the desert. The summer and the desert were designed to kill the ill-suited. The scorching sun, the dry air, and the hot sand reduced our party to a load of heaving and panting. Parched from just one day, we searched for shade and water. It was just a little over noon when we came across the canyon. This was a welcome sight, but the effort to find a safe decline would be tricky. The sandstone was beautiful. Shades of red, orange, black, and purple thrown about the canyon walls like paint. Thankfully, Socks was successful in pointing out a dune that stretched from top to bottom. I'm sure the mule and Socks would complain about their burning legs attempting to descend down the canyon. I know it's unusual to take the opinions of animals into consideration, but they had been with me for such a long time that they felt akin to people rather than beasts. With that, it was decided that we'd have to wait for the sun to lower, just a tad, in order to safely travel down. The blistering heat dissipated enough that it allowed us to travel down the canyon without complaint. The lush green grass, cattails, cottonwoods, and fruit trees seemed out of place in a desolate wasteland. I saw that a small stream supplied the encased vivarium in perpetual potation. Salty cedars lined its banks the whole length it traveled. Taking in the atmosphere, I got to setting up camp and let the pair graze while I checked on my map to see where on it there might be canyons. I could only see that the canyons were north of Santa Fe. I wasn't ready to assume that I was there just yet, so I held out for confirmation with a local. That would be tomorrow's endeavor. For now, I set my cot over top of a soft bed of grass. The first time my shoulders didn't splay out in discomfort. I could finally sleep like I wasn't miles away from home, like I'd never left behind my comfortable bed. It might have been a few hours into the night when it started to feel unnatural, downright unsettling. I woke up to a trailing ribbon of smoke burning my lungs. I noticed a pair of hooved critters standing while sleeping. Everything seemed normal, other than my beauty rest being interrupted by white coals and dying smolders. I was ready to fall back to sleep. That's when I heard it. The average person probably couldn't notice the disturbance at first glance. Sounds so imperceptible that it was safer to assume there was nothing at all. I could hear it. Rock shifting ever so slightly from across the canyon on yonder cliff. Couldn't see anything in the pitch dark of the night. No help could be offered by the stars nor moon. But it was undeniable that something was just a tad bit off. Whatever was spying on me held its breath and lessened its movements. Attempts to stay hidden in the quiet of the darkness. It almost worked, if not for its microscopic error. I could not shake the feeling of my eyes focusing in on me. The atmosphere softened when, whatever the thing was, had disappeared behind the cliff's edge. I waited a while longer to make sure the piercing gaze was gone, but make no mistake, I was still paranoid that that thing was trying so hard to stay quiet. I dozed off when the fear died down. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night, for my dream was filled with fear of the night. Rather, what was living inside it. I geared up for the long journey ahead and got to riding for any contact. Stealing every cool moment of the early morning, I made a note to avoid the hellish conditions of the high noon. Our trip led us towards a grand and expansive field of golden straws. We made it this far due to the position of the sun. I assumed we were south of Santa Fe, so I rode northward with the blazing rays pelting my back. I searched for any sign of activity, but came up empty. Lonesome mountains were everywhere, separated by infinite oceans of gold. If there was anyone in this region, then I would have to scour every surface for even a hint of someone's presence. I believe I rode for hours until I had to rest. or more appropriately, escape the heat of the sun. My poor companions were panting, stricken with thirst and plagued by hunger. We had to find a source of fresh running water and a plot to graze in. Purple hills, red mesas, and orange sandstone bulbs turned this otherwise bleak situation into a once-of-a-lifetime art exhibit. I took my hat off in awe of this beauty. Scanning the horizon, a plateau caught my attention. It looked like a pillar of smoke was rising from behind the rocky curtain. I was ecstatic to say the least. Our party took off to gamble our chances. Friend or foe, it didn't matter. I just needed to see another face that didn't have big blocky teeth. The smoke was coming from a hidden spot in the canyon. Cottonwoods obscured my line of sight. Lucky for me, there was a muddy river at the bottom of the climb. Salvation. I couldn't exactly get the source so readily. Canyons have the difficult position of rarely offering up ease of access. Steep walls discouraged most, but I was not most. We rode along the edge until it gave way with a gravel slope. The path I took led me further away from the encampment. Socializing would have to wait until I rejuvenated. In the meantime, I took off all the weight that inhibited my four-legged friends. They took their drink while I scoped out a narrow section of the river. It was a hike and a half. Once I could see a shallow riverbed, I made plans to cross. My party was already well into their meal once I returned. I waited until they finished up before making the attempt. Rivers in the great wide west may seem warm, but don't be misled. They are freezing cold, running from mountain snowmelt and cold groundwater. It wouldn't take long before you succumbed to the frigid water and went limp. Drowning is a hell of a way to die. All the time in the world to assess your predicament before the air to your lungs was replaced by a freezing cold shock of liquid. Your brain suffocating from every attack on its temple. With any luck, a strong current could bash your head against a hard surface and end your suffering quickly. Sorry, I didn't mean to get so macabre there. We didn't have to fight the rivers to get across, unless you considered weak ripples as adversary. If not, then it was an uneventful crossing. The smoke was within sight. I could practically feel the sensation of anticipation building in me like the flame of a furnace. Excited, I picked up the pace and readied myself to encounter my first person in a long while. My relief turned to horror. It was a grisly sight. The struggle had ensued, apparent from the thrashes in the sand and blood-caked debris. The whole family was put to slaughter by something. I couldn't bear to see the kids in that state. The man I assumed was their father had his hand firmly fixed around a revolver. Not a single casing on the ground to indicate he put up a fight. God, their poor mother. She didn't deserve that. Her hair had been peeled like it had the ability to slide off. She'd been scalped. The deep lacerations that stripped the other family members were evident of conflict. His whole family had the misfortune of encountering natives. Their arrows plucked from soft flesh. The horses they possessed were most likely taken as spoils along with anything they were carrying. I was worried then. Reptiles, currents, and storms had been my first encounters with danger, but this was proof that my good friend was right to warn me. Even though I should have left then and there, I couldn't. This poor family had committed the unforgivable crime of existing in another's air, and they paid the fine with their lives. I wanted to give them a proper burial, right their perceived wrongs. It's a shame that I didn't know the Lord's Prayer, but my best would have to do. I hated how easily digging their shallow graves came to me. I had hoped I'd never have to bury another soul ever again, especially not children. The work was done and I mounted up. These lands were not welcoming of men such as mine. I retraced my path and swept away my tracks with branches. No expense was spared in erasing my presence. The new goal was to get as far as possible from this place. The ride was buried in a thick blanket of unease, every moment dipped in palpable tension. I couldn't help but think back on the previous night. Were those eyes the same ones that carried out that slaughter? I didn't have time to process that thought before I turned my head to look behind me. A brave spotted me and took off in the opposite direction, likely to gather more members of the raiding party. I wasted no time in trying to lose the arriving wave of death by cutting through the canyon. It was miles away, but it was my best bet. I drove my heels into Sock's belly and he darted in response. The mule followed suit. I could hear the labored breaths as they drowned out any other noise. We were practically gliding over the desert. I don't know how it was possible, but I could feel a foreign presence enter my wide radius. I turned to face where the foreign presence entered from. More than a dozen braves tailed us, riding on tough mounts. These few men wore old Union cavalry uniforms, customized by pieces of bright cloth, non-army issued boots, and varying hats. Their faces were covered in either colorful paint or shouldered by a bandana. The only way you could tell they were natives was by their decorated spears, bows, and firearms. At their head was an intimidating figure, tall, even as he was seated, and full of quiet focus, their leader. Even from where I rode, the eyes pierced through me.
Here! Here! Come on, Socks, don't fail me now!
I yelled out as we made a desperate dash for the canyon. I had to slow them down somehow, and there was no other way I saw fit than the one I enacted. Hoisting the Winchester over my shoulder, I steadied my foot with the saddle's holster until I gained purchase. I hung off Sock's side and aimed the rifle back at the pursuers. I fired a few rounds before the party stopped dead in their tracks. I thought they had been persuaded to discontinue the chase. Once I furthered the distance, they continued their pursuit. Damn it. He wanted to stay out of range, but not out of sight. They weren't giving up that easily. I kept firing and they kept pausing. The dance continued until I was within sight of the canyon. I knew they'd just keep following until they closed the gap and gutted me for all my worth. I couldn't just hide in the canyon, so once I made my way deep within the confines, I made my last stand on a pedestal provided by the earth. The mounts were hidden behind the salty cedars as I aimed my rifle for the uninvited host. I laid there on the hot sand, lost in tunnel vision, waiting for the first brave to rear his head around the canyon wall. That never happened. Instead, I heard shifting rocks overhead, and before I knew it, the party caught me by surprise. Their leader descended upon me with a gleaming hatchet in hand and attempted to cleave his way through my torso. I slammed the butt of my rifle into the side of his head. He lost his balance and went tumbling. Unfortunately for me, he took me down with him. The fight took us both towards the muddy water. The panic I felt in that moment was unreal. This kind of struggle was not new to me, but it wasn't to him either. I tried to separate him from his hatchet, but found no success. Shiny metal caught my attention. On his waist was a saber. I knew that I needed to get that off his person to make this battle a fair one. I pivoted and used his own weight against him. Losing his balance, he fell into the mud, and I was quick to part him from his sword. What he could not afford was an easy victory. He bent my knee in on itself and got back on his feet. I was staggered, but the pain didn't register in that life or death situation. We circled one another. Neither one wanted to open themselves to attack. I made the mistake that my dance partner didn't know the steps to our choreography. He caught me in my failings and tackled me into the dry clay. The saber out of reach, the brave drove his heel into my wrist and pinned me down. I wasn't ready for death. No one is. not unless you have the privilege to age out of a profession where men often die young. Standing over me was death. The decision to option out of it wasn't in my control. It was his. As he readied himself to drive the hatchet into my face, we all heard the blood-curdling screeches, a mix of sheared metal and injured animal calls. It was then that my assailant got himself running. I laid in the clay until the resounding screams gave me the necessary drive to get out of Dodge. Thankfully, the party failed to locate Socks and the mule. I struggled to get on my saddle. Pain infested my right leg and left arm. After a little encouragement from the monster's cry, I jumped on and directed Socks to make off. He shook the entire time. We summited the canyon's lip and took off for the east, liquid courage soaking every muscle of my being. My nerves chilled at the theater play of events. I charged well into the east, ignoring my companion's complaints, until I was certain we were out of range. When I looked back towards the retreat, evidence of our departure was lost in the ocean of golden straws. I wasn't relaxed. There was no unwinding. The same question that bounced off the walls of my mind came darting out of my mouth like a shallow, breathless rasp.
What the hell was that?
I've had my fair share of encounters with all manner of beasts. Bears, snakes, cougars, and wolves. They all had a distinct dialect. This banshee held no discernible elements. The noises that made up his harrowing call were ones that shouldn't have been married together. Metal scraping, spit webs peeling, glistening gums, and high-pitched shrieks created a cacophony of unholy union. Socks and our accompanying stubbornness would not be sleeping standing up. I motioned them to crouch, and I got to work building a sandy nest. The mound had to be erect, as it was the only way we could afford coverage in an otherwise flat environment. My Winchester had never seen so much action. The barrel didn't even so much as cake in soot from our battle earlier. I took post as the light casted by the setting sun disappeared under the western horizon. It's no easy task to aim blindly into the dark in preparation for an unknown host. I waited for hours as cold sweat burned my eyes, not wanting to look away for even a second in my futile attempt. I couldn't see anything, yet I remained vigilant for whatever came leaping out with claws, fangs, or horn. Something did come for me, a band of things. I heard them compressing straw underfoot as they stalked our motionless party. Dried foliage snapped off and clung to mangy fur. I suppose their youngest and most inexperienced were not privy to the stealthy approach, made apparent when they began to howl and cry. Jackals. Why would it not be jackals? The hunting party splintered into two. The horns of the bison flanking my undefended sides. I made the difficult choice to reach into my satchel for my oil lamp. I tore off the loose cloth and dipped it in the flask. The glows of flames betrayed their nightly camouflage. 4 mutts became 4 carcasses. The other side of the assault didn't bother to avenge their fallen comrades. It wasn't safe to rest there. I geared up and got the party's hooves to running. The petals of a bright dahlia stretched across the eastern horizon. I wasn't in a fit state to keep going, but I wanted to get far away from the dangers at any cost, even at my own health's detriment. I'm sure Socks could sense something was wrong with me. He quickened his pace, but took careful consideration in not agitating my wounds by softening his stride. I could smell myself all too well. Iron, powder, sweat, and dried up earth. It clung to me like a persistent gnat, or like the pincers of a ravenous tick. I had hoped we would not face any more hurdles. My battered body could not face another obstacle. We rode for such a long time that my eyelids became heavy, my grip weakened, and my breath slowed. My clear sight of red sand became a vignette, and then I was out. I was back in the war, this time with a commanding officer barking orders in my ear. At least, I thought I was. I'm sure I was not proud of my actions. I bashed my rifle butt into skulls, lit fires to smoke out homesteaders, and left fields bare in my insatiable hunger. Silver, gold, porcelain, and gems were sacked from massive plantations, and I was a part of those raids. It is vague, but I think there was something stirring that day. The line of men were ready to run these civilians into the dirt for all they're worth. I saw families huddled together and friends carrying each other along the way. Small youngins that did not deserve the slaughter that awaited them. I think I could no longer stomach the horror, so I yelled,
"Run away! Run away! Get out of here! Hurry!"
The shouts left my lungs. Next thing I knew, I was knocked off my horse. I don't remember how I got the revolver in my hands. In the next moment, bugles sounded a charging command. Their officer led them emboldened with northern fervor. My party obliged the invitation and took to battle. Smoke choked the air and blinded visibility. Madness unfurled its awful gnash and maw that day. It was deep into this miasma that I saw a monster of a man hold his bayonet over the eye of a downed officer. I think it was me that had killed him. When he fell to the ground, a lone Union officer stood a few feet behind with his gun drawn. I was on my back, and salty mud worked its way under my eyelids. However, it was then that the Yankee ran over to me. I half expected him to grant me a quick death. Instead, he poured water over my eyes using his canteen. Standing over me was my dear friend, the man that saved me and helped me all my life. Waking up from my exhaustion, I noticed that Socks had kept me from falling off my saddle by breaking into a brisk stroll. We had been wandering for so long that the landscape shifted from blistering deserts to canopied forests overhead. Tall cedars and pines created a network of shady coverage. I looked around us trying to gauge where we ended up heading. Socks, proven time and time again to be a loyal beast, stuck to the path I last left him with. We were hiking up a mountain I had seen in the east. It had seemed that we were in the right direction. I was operating off an empty tank, made worse by my ever-growing dehydration. I took Socks off the path and headed across the mountain in search of water. A freshwater spring burst out from behind walls of red sandstone higher up on the mountain. I set up 2 pans for Socks and his buddy. I drank like it would be my last taste of water in forever. I washed my neck free from the clumps of dried mud, the blood that stained my wounds, and the trails of sweat that left behind salt. I was lost in maintenance, oblivious to my surroundings, when the sensation of something being a little too close for comfort came over me. I threw everything back onto my hoofed companions and quickly descended the mountain. Ducking under a frenzy of branches, zigzagging around trees, and leaping over jagged rocks, I could not risk any chances. We reached the edge of the tree line, and I strained to get a glimpse at whatever kept setting off my alarm bells, scanning for any movement, holding my breath to hear even the slightest shift in the pine needles. I steadied myself to avoid the errors owed to even the smallest twitches. Nothing. Not a damn thing. Was I mistaken? I wanted to confirm my suspicions, so I waited for a while longer, until I saw something emerge from the forest. A stallion, black as night, just standing a few hundred feet away from me. Couldn't be. The sense of the invasive eyes found their origin, but I had a hard time believing they were one and the same. I wasn't able to think about it longer before the shadow left us. I slept that night far from the mountain. Rest didn't come easy, but my battered body forced me to take an opportunity to recover. The starry night was the escape my mind desperately needed after the events I had experienced. The next day was one that truly put into scope the severity of my situation. We were traveling along a garnet ridge when the mule began to panic at what I thought was nothing. Then the rattling disputed what sense of lingering calm there was in the early morning. The mule had received the venomous kiss, leaving me to clumsily retrieve the Winchester. Needless to say, the rattler's head went missing in a puff of smoke. The mule, in a great deal of pain, fell down the ridge and slammed onto the rough bottom. A sickening snap found my ears. I wanted to help the beast of burden, I really did, but there was little that could be done when the leg is snapped in two. Heaving in anguish, I held my friend's head in my lap, trying to calm him down. I didn't want to do it, but I also didn't want to leave him to suffer either. With one discharge, I granted him mercy. Despite the arid climate, rain fell on my face. Our time at the Garnet Ridge was an extended one, yet I carried myself over the lip and back onto Socks. I gave the mule one last glance. I couldn't carry the luggage that he endured for hundreds of miles. I rode off to the east. It was the only thing I could do. Every time we kept to the path for a few hours, we'd encounter a new landscape. From the mountain we hit red sand. From there, the red desert transitioned into a vast and fairly shallow valley. It was a region packed with vibrance, but its viewer was one whose curious nature had already been exhausted by many tragedies. I felt the sickness squeeze every bit of life out from beneath my veins. I was weak, weaker than when I had arrived. The world, often a still and anchored painting, began to spin so fast I could barely hang on to Socks. There was only red in the calm of the valley, but all at once the rays danced and filled the emptiness. Spiraling, twisting, in concentric bands muddled up the beautiful canvas. I couldn't stand to bear this illusion any longer. I removed the cap from my canteen and washed away the insanity. In my mind's chaos, we'd crossed the valley and stood on another mountain's doorstep. It was there that I felt a foreign plague enter my radius. The same eyes were summiting the other side of the valley. The stillness, the quiet, the unchanging focus of eyes so honed in their physical hurt. It was beautiful nonetheless. A black figure superimposed against the setting sun. The contrast was captivating as much as it was unsettling. Always out of reach, but never out of mind. My persistent pursuer didn't have to overexert itself. I swear that the horse's muzzle had an oil-dripping tar onto the dry earth, coiling like the body of a serpent. As black as pitch, the liquid fell in droplets. We left for the protection of the trees. The image burned itself into my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that it drank from anything but water. I didn't drop to the ground. At this point, I was certain that I would never be able to climb back onto Socks. I slept on my saddle that night, the last of this infernal trip. Throughout all the events, Socks stayed true to my side. He earned his release. The morning of the last day, I took Socks to open grasslands below the mountain. I searched for any signs of wild herds. When we found a stream, instead of taking a drink from it, we followed it to where the horses gathered. Many herds drank from the mountain's waters. It didn't matter to me which one was best, only that Socks could be let in. I dismounted, cutting the straps that locked the saddle to Socks's ribs. I had made my decision long ago. I removed the bit from his teeth and unlatched his reins. I couldn't protect him, not in this state, so I entrusted his health to strangers. It was the best I could offer after all the grief I caused him. He lingered, but I chased him away every time. I went where he couldn't follow. It's funny, really. I remember having a different friend from a long time ago. He hated how the South betrayed him. For all his tireless work tilling land and harvesting cash crops, the Confederacy repaid him by cramming traumatic war deep into his psyche. When his life as a soldier proved to not be enough, the government confiscated his land. Every time, his sacrifice was never sufficient, so they took and took until they picked him to the bone. The war spat him out and left him spent. Life in Canada treated him better than everything he had experienced as a Confederacy's lackey. He boasted plenty, bragged long into the night, made sure to let us know how happy he had been, until one day, he sat me down after talking everyone else's ear off. He spoke to me in a serious tone.
You know, I never regretted my decision. I don't miss the history, especially the snakes, mosquitoes, and malaria, but I miss my friends.
I comforted him as best I could before giving my response.
You got out. That's more than could be said for most of us,
he affirmed.
I know, but it doesn't feel that way. Sometimes, I wake up back in the field, shaken with fear and alone.
I interjected.
The war's over. Put the past behind you.
For a moment, he contemplated disclosing a thought that crossed his mind.
The past few years were pretty calm. Not much can rile me these days. Fishing, skiing, and camping mostly eat up my time. I thought nothing could bring me back to those choked skies.
I leaned in, and that was his cue to continue.
I was camping deep into the tundra. I thought nothing could happen since there were people far out amongst the frozen lakes. My carelessness nearly cost me my life. I didn't respect the land, so it tossed a beast my way. A calm, collected monster. I couldn't escape it, and I knew that. A bear, tall and mighty, stalked me for miles. I swear it felt like the days of long marches. The anxiety that built up in anticipation of ambush. This bear reminded me of everything I tried to leave behind. I didn't survive because I was skillful, but because I was lucky enough to find others. It never made so much as a low rumbling. If it hadn't left its tracks in the snow, there would be no evidence that it ever existed.
He passed away the following winter. The disturbing moment embedded his words into me ever since. I'd get the opportunity to experience everything he did for myself. My stalker still pursued me. It never stopped, always giving me enough room to falsely assume safety, and without fail, it reminded me of its presence, wearing me down until I dropped dead. It never ceased. I doubt it ever slept, looming over me like buzzards scouting out a fresh carcass. I ran to hide in the sandstone chambers. I don't know why I did it, for the action alone merely served to delay the inevitable. I wedged myself deep within the labyrinth and I aimed my rifle to face anything that might wander too close. My nerves turned to cold steel at the idea of slow but assured death. I didn't want to believe the sound of clacking was real as it neared. The dark horse reared its head as it impossibly wormed its way to find me. I deliberately took the narrow path to inconvenience it. It neared until the exit was completely hidden behind its figure. Its form molded like clay as its ribs scraped against the walls. At the other end of this narrow passage stood the stalking beast. I expected it to charge me down, pin me down to the cold, hard floor, and tear me apart. Instead, it just stood at the other end, a silent, deafening presence, eyes silvered by cataracts. I assumed it was considering every possible escape route that I could take. After a long moment of scanning, it did something bizarre. Freezing in place, the horse unfolded its head like a blossoming flower. A sickening cacophony of popping joints and shifting bones broke the delicate silence. The newly formed maw was lined with barbs. Its gums receded to reveal gleaming teeth. Where the skull should have been was only a pale, slender tongue that glowed bright. A mesmerizing pulse of flashing blue and violet lights. Eye stalks emerged from the dark of its throat, completing this amalgamation of flesh and bone. There, right there, I saw the flower bloom, and I was lost in awe. Before I could fully appreciate this display, the flesh flower clamped down on my arm and tore it clean off, disappearing into the abyss of its mouth. I was broken from my trance, and pain filled every fiber of my being. I kicked and screamed, scratched at its gums, and beat it in the head with the butt of my rifle. Nothing seemed to faze it until it opened up its mouth once again. I took my rifle and fired into its mouth. It didn't whine nor scream, but as it staggered, I took the chance to slide past it. My body sank into its flesh as I squeezed past. I navigated the maze to find a scalable surface in the smooth sandstone. I heard the monster trailing close behind. A newfound strength restored me, just long enough to climb. Thank goodness that it held out, because as I rolled onto the top, I heard a single snap. The many jaws of the flesh blossom slammed shut, trying to take me down with it. I'm stranded here, currently awaiting the blood loss to claim me. That thing is still pacing down there, waiting for me to show a little weakness. I'm never going to deliver this letter, that much is clear. I hate that I can never fulfill any requests my friends hand me. Since the end is near, I might as well find out what all the fuss is about regarding this letter. My dearest Maria, I'm ashamed to admit it has taken me this long to reach out to you. So much has happened in the time that we last met. In those years, I have never forgotten about our moment. I no longer want to deny the spark that happened between us. I want to acknowledge you for all you're worth. I never meant to hurt you so. I want to reunite with you and offer the life I should have years ago. I've gotten your letters over the years. I wanted to give Emilio the life I couldn't afford myself. Please, make your way east. My dearest friend has hopefully delivered your money to make the trip. Sort your obligations, please. Let us be a proper family. Sincerely, Robert Marrier. Oh, Robert, what did you get yourself into? I guess you can't be trusted. Should have warned old Lysias about you when you were off to Vicksburg. If anyone finds this journal, please finish where I could not. I'm not going to make it to Santa Fe. Of that, I'm certain. I'm so sorry, Brighton. Maybe someone else, someone better, will publish your book. I'm going to watch the stars cross the night sky one last time. Goodbye.